Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
One, two, three.
Who is welcome at the table of the Lord?
All are welcome here. You are welcome here.
Who belongs in the house of the Lord?
All are welcome here. You are welcome here. All the hurting, hungry, tired and afraid. All the lonely, broken people with no place.
We call you blessed child. You show us Christ's face. You are blessed child. You show us God's grace. Who is welcome at the table of the Lord?
All are welcome here. You are welcome here.
Who belongs in the house of the Lord?
All are welcome here. You are welcome here. All the hurting, hungry, tired and afraid. All the lonely, broken people with no place.
We call you blessed child. You show us Christ's face. You are blessed child. You show us God's grace. Who belongs here? You belong here. Who belongs here? You belong. Who belongs here? We belong here. All belong in the house of the Lord. Who belongs here? You belong here. Who belongs here? You belong. Who belongs here? We belong here. All belong in the house of the Lord. All the hurting, hungry, tired and afraid. All the lonely, broken people with no place. We call you blessed child. You show us Christ's face. You are blessed child. You show us God's grace. You are blessed child. You show us Christ's face. You are blessed child. You show us God's grace.
My friend, have you lost hold again? Do you feel like somebody else? Have you got fire in your mind that keeps you up at night? I watch you run around head down and disregard it. I see you running from your shadow. How can I ask you please to stay? You can run till you've got nothing left, but we'll still end up face to face. Be where you are. Be where you are. Don't be afraid of how you feel. Don't look for life in past or future. Look right at it dead in the eye. After this moment, there's a new one. Be where you are. Be where you are. And I know that it gets lonely and dark and it feels hard. And I know that you want to close off your heart. You've been using all this noise to avoid meeting your mess. You don't have to work so hard. Just stop and take a breath and be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are.
Hi Crosspoint, we're entering a season of giving. And although you are always a part of making a difference in our community, I want to give you some updates and some tangible ways to get involved this season, specifically around giving. Last week, our Good Neighbor team, in partnership with World Relief Durham, welcomed and are helping to support a refugee family from Afghanistan. It's a couple with several kids and one on the way. They were welcomed at the airport, they were brought to a home, they were given a meal, groceries, lots of other things. And our team, along with others in partnership with World Relief, will continue to support them and their children and the baby on the way as they settle into this new and incredibly different life here in the United States. And in the coming weeks and months, they will continue to need our support, and we will keep you informed as to their needs and if there's any opportunities for you to get involved. This week also, Crosspoint was asked to partner again with Operation AL to provide Thanksgiving meals to 20 families experiencing homelessness in Apex. So many great things were happening there. We had a team of young women who were able to get involved, to go shopping, and to provide those meals. So how can you be involved? Well, as always, you can continue to give. Crosspoint.org/contribute. You can text crosspointenc to 77977 to donate to all of the things that we're doing and more. A few other ways that you can be involved. We're currently partnering and supporting Wake County Foster Care through a gift card drive. Just something small to give families a little bit of a boost this holiday season. Gift cards should be in increments of $25. They should be to local retail stores like Kohl's or Target or Walmart, and they should be to family-friendly restaurants. You can go to crosspoint.org/joy to the world for more details about drop-off and any other information that you need. Again, this year we're partnering with the White Oak Foundation to provide over 500 gifts to 48 families, and we need your help. First, go to crosspoint.org/joy to the world, and you'll find the Sign Up Genius where you can view the gifts, you can find out the information, you can sign up to provide gifts, and you can learn more about how to either have it delivered to the church or when and where to drop it off. And I want you to know that these are more than just gifts. These are a way to offer just a little bit of joy to so many who are hurting and who are struggling in our community. I got to talk with so many of these families this week, individuals with their own journeys, with their own situations, some with cancer, Wake County bus drivers, parents, grandparents, all in need this holiday season. They are so grateful, and we are so blessed to have the opportunity to bless others. Lastly, you know that we talk a lot about the affordable housing crisis in Wake County and in our area and the toll that it has on so many in our community. You heard a little bit about that just with the people experiencing homelessness. Many of the families that we are giving gifts to, we also have helped pay bills and rent. You know that Crosspoint pays quite a bit of rent for individuals who need it. But we want to do so much more than just pay bills. We want to be a part of getting to the root of the problem and be a part of changing the situation. So we invite you to attend our Theology Uncorked meeting Tuesday, November 30th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. We'll be hearing from and talking with Devin Ross from the organization One Wake. He will be talking about the affordable housing situation in Wake County and the surrounding areas and give us more information about how we can be involved in advocating for change as a church. This is something that we as Crosspoint staff feel really strongly about being a part of, and we know that so many of you feel strongly about it as well. Everyone is invited to attend, no pressure at all, but to listen or to be a part of the conversation. But we hope that some of you will be interested in joining a team of individuals who help Crosspoint move strategically toward advocacy for affordable housing in the area. You can find out more and get the link to the event at crosspoint.org/adults and click on Theology Uncorked. All right, time for a little bit of a transition. This morning, I want to talk about a parable that for so long, its interpretation has epitomized the American dream. It's been interpreted as taking what little you have been given and turning it into something so much more. It glorifies investments and multiplying returns, creating personal kingdoms from almost nothing, ideas and themes that we love in the United States culture. And it's said that histories are most often written by the winners, and this is also the case with biblical interpretation. The interpretations that we have that have historically been the loudest, that have bubbled up to the top and been repeated for multiple decades or even centuries, are those that have been written by those with the power to make themselves heard and the funding to get themselves published. So most often when we take a look at scripture, we need to take a look at where we have gotten our interpretation, why certain explanations resonate with us. Is it our culture? Is it our tradition? And then how we might pull in equally valuable, but often silenced voices. So I want to take a look at our parable bit by bit. I want to step back from the 19th and 20th century Western interpretation and realign the parable within its literary and historical context. And I want to give credit to Dr. Elizabeth Dowling, a teacher of theology and philosophy at Australian Catholic University, for some of her influence. So the parable of the pounds or the parable investments, is found in the book of Luke, chapter 19. You can also find it in the book of Matthew. There, it's referred to as the parable of the talents. When Jesus tells this parable to the people in the book of Luke, he's just come from the home of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, and he's on his way to Jerusalem. But he stops and he teaches this. And Jesus said, "A nobleman went to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then return." All right, stop here. So this nobleman is somebody with family power. People know his name, they know his father, they know his family. He has some bit of power already, but he wants more. He is going to a country far from his home to acquire power and prestige and a name for himself. And the language here suggests that he's acquiring title and land through illegitimate means, likely by force, manipulation, violence. The parable goes on. He, the nobleman, summoned 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 pounds and said to them, "Do business with these until I come back." But the citizens of his country hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, "We do not want this man to rule over us." So this nobleman, before he leaves his home country, where he is hated, calls for 10 men that he has enslaved to come to him. He gives each of them 10 pounds. It's a denomination of money. He tells them, "Do business with these until I come back." And translated more literally, this means administrate for me. Manage this capital. Follow in my footsteps. Work like you have seen me work. This is not language of legitimate business. This is almost like mob boss language. This is get the job done language. Now, this nobleman's current citizens hate him. They want him gone. And you can probably imagine why, the way that he rules. They don't want him acquiring more power. So when he leaves, seeking a better position, more land, they go about ousting him in actually a legitimate way. They're acting within their legal rights at the time. This would have been very recognized by the listeners. The citizens put together a delegation to go to the ruler, presumably in Rome, who is above this nobleman in power, and to let these higher-ups know how they feel and to ask them to intervene, to not allow this nobleman to have any more power and to remove him from his current position. And the story goes on. The nobleman returned, having received royal power. He ordered these slaves to whom he had given the money to be summoned so that he might find out what they had gained by trading. The first came forward and said, "Lord, your pound has made 10 more pounds." And he said to him, "Well done, good slave. Because you have been trustworthy in a small thing, take charge of 10 cities. And then the second came, saying, "Lord, your pound has made 5 pounds." And he said to him, "And you rule over 5 cities." Now, when the nobleman returns, having acquired the power he was looking for, he summons only 3 of the 10 slaves to check in on the progress they've made. This is very good storytelling happening here. It's set up as a triad. The first slave comes forward, gives an acceptable report, and receives a reward. The second slave comes forward, gives an acceptable report, and receives a reward. And now we've seen this kind of writing before in the book of Luke, this 3-part setup. We've seen it in the parable of the Good Samaritan. That parable is also told as a set of 3. 3 men arrive on the scene of a crime. First there's a priest, then there's a Levite, and the priest and the Levite act similarly. But then there's the unexpected Samaritan who comes last and acts unexpectedly. Now, this parable of the pounds is set up similarly. This was a common storytelling practice. The nobleman calls back 3 of his slaves, not all the 10 he gave the money to. The listeners are comfortable with the first slave. We're comfortable with the second slave. They both acted in similar ways. But just like with the story of the Good Samaritan, we've been set up to expect something out of the ordinary with the third slave. When the first 2 enslaved men approach the nobleman, they refer to him as master. He owns them, he rules them, and they are clearly willing to do whatever they need to do to please him. And the listener really can sympathize with them. This nobleman is clearly not kind, is not compassionate, and has the power and influence that they do not. Who knows what horrors that they've gone through or what they would endure if they didn't comply with him. But when the listeners heard the return of the two enslaved men, when they heard about the return that those two enslaved men had gotten, those first two men, when they heard about it, how they had doubled the capital that they had been given, they would have been absolutely horrified. They would have immediately understood that the return on the investments that the enslaved men were describing was obscene. It was ridiculous, even outrageous. It's meant to get this horrified gasp from those that hear it. There was no stock market during this time, as you know, so investments, they were increased by often loaning money, charging interest, trading, and with varying amounts of return. So a legal and reasonable interest rate at that time was around 12%. However, the amount that these two enslaved men would have had to have had clearly meant that they had charged an interest rate of about 1,000%. They had gotten the return on their investment corruptly, just like the nobleman who had acquired his kingdom by illegitimate means. They had to have done the same in order to have achieved such a return. Not only that, they had to have broken their own religious laws in order to achieve this. The laws in Deuteronomy say, "You shall not charge interest on loans to another Israelite, interest on money, interest on provisions, interest on anything that is lent." So the slaves who had been oppressed by this nobleman had become the oppressors, much like the previous story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who was collecting money, charging interest, and extra fees. These two enslaved men were doing what they'd been asked to do by the nobleman. Business, just like they'd had observed him doing. They had fallen in line rather than suffer the consequences. And the nobleman rewarded them for their service. They were given power, the power of presiding over their own cities in the nobleman's kingdom. But power like that can only be kept by continuing to fall in line, by keeping the system going, by becoming that which you hate. The choice they made in how to acquire the greatest return on the capital given to them gave them immediate benefits, power, wealth, prestige. But it also cost them their integrity and the trust of their friends and their neighbors whom they had to have exploited in order to move ahead without immediate harm to themselves. So the current reward that those two enslaved men meant more to them than any future one. And I'm sure they had plenty of reasons for their choice. Then we hear about the third enslaved man. Then the other came, saying, "Lord, here's your pound. I wrapped it up in a piece of cloth, for I was afraid of you, because you are a harsh man. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow." And he said to him, this is the nobleman speaking now, "I will judge you by your own words, you wicked, worthless slave. You knew, did you, that I was a harsh man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow? Why then did you not put my money into the bank? Then when I returned, I could have collected it with interest." The third enslaved man talks to the nobleman with legal language. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you do not sow was a crime, and it came with penalties. This third enslaved man made a different choice than the first two, and the audience waits with bated breath. The nobleman calls him wicked or worthless slave. But this enslaved man is not, neither wicked nor worthless. He's not lazy, as so many Western interpretations have led us to believe. This third enslaved man did act. He did make a difficult and strategic and arguably more difficult choice than the first two men. He has identified the master as an extortionist. He's called him out for holding illegitimate power. And he's made a choice to wrap up the money and not participate in the corrupt power system that the nobleman was asking him to be a part of to save his own skin and to further his own businesses. He refused to be a part of continuing the oppression. This enslaved man's actions challenged this long-established power structure that was in place. It challenged the idea of the rich getting richer by way of the poor getting poorer. And by doing so, this third enslaved man gave up his opportunity for immediate advancement and even for protection. There were repercussions for this enslaved man's accusations and actions. He faced beatings, imprisonment, even death, and his family did too. But he had chosen a side. He sided with the powerless. And this is what the nobleman says. The nobleman said to the bystanders who were watching all of this happen, "Take the pound from him," the third enslaved man, "and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. And the crowd said to him, "Lord, he already has 10 pounds. I tell you, to all those who have, more will be given, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But as for these enemies of mine who do not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence." The nobleman took from the third enslaved man to the protest of the people, and the crowd clearly recognized the injustice that was happening. But to keep his power, the nobleman had to squash the opposition, so he refused to listen to his citizens and had the delegation of people who had opposed him violently murdered in front of him. That is the way he would rule his kingdom, without compassion, with tyranny, with oppression, with the powerful himself gaining more and more power, and those without falling further behind. This type of kingdom was counter to the kingdom of God that Jesus was always talking about. And so this parable was a dilemma for the listener, and it's a dilemma for us. The enslaved who participated in the system of extortion and oppression were rewarded. The enslaved man who did not, and those who sided with him, were punished. Not much incentive to do the right thing. Bringing about God's kingdom sounds difficult, countercultural, it sounds dangerous. It reminds me a little bit of when you speak to your children about the importance of telling the truth after they've lied and explaining that the consequences suck now. Lying would ultimately be more harmful in the long run, I promise you. But it's really difficult to convince someone, even ourselves, that integrity and considering the future is more important than current comfort. Trust me, you'll thank me later, is really hard sell while experiencing consequences of our actions that could have been avoided if we'd just not been caught. It always feels so much easier to get behind the present comfort and benefits rather than to consider the future and the ramifications for other people. And this parable is the same. This parable is a parable within a parable for the original listeners. You see, their families had experienced this story in real life. It was parallel to the history of Herod Archelaus. The historian Josephus tells us that in 4 BCE, about 4 years or so before the birth of Jesus, Herod the Great's son, Archelaus, traveled to Rome to ask that his brother-in-law might be granted the right to rule a land. Now, Archelaus was asking for his brother-in-law, but his real intentions were that he would actually be the ruler. And he went about it this way because he wasn't convinced that he would be granted permission by the Roman ruler Caesar Augustus if he just asked for himself. So he was being sneaky. And like in the parable, when Archelaus, his current citizens, heard about his plan to become more powerful, they formed a delegation. to oppose him being given a higher position. There was a delegation of about 50 Jews that traveled to Rome to protest. And when they got to Rome, they were joined by over 8,000 Jews who did not want to see, I'm having trouble with his name, Archelaus become more powerful. The delegation was seen by Caesar Augustus. They explained to him that his tyranny and his cruelty, and they explained that they had experienced the same thing under Herod the Great, and that his son Archelaus was just as bad. And just a side note, Herod the Great was the king in the book of Matthew, who had all the boys under 2 years old murdered because he wanted to kill baby Jesus. And you can find this story in Matthew chapter 2. So the delegation told Caesar Augustus that the first act of Archelaus's reign had been to slaughter 3,000 of his own countrymen. He was a cruel and tyrannical ruler, just like the parable. He was following in the footsteps of his father. So Caesar Augustus listened to the Jewish delegation, then he listened to a friend who spoke on Archelaus's behalf. And in the end, Caesar Augustus chose to make Archelaus a governor rather than a king. For 10 years, Archelaus ruled his territory with cruelty. Finally, in his 10th year, Caesar Augustus banished him to Gaul. Jesus is telling an all-familiar story. It's not so hidden of a story. It almost parallels what had already happened. Listeners were quite familiar with tyrannical rulers. They were quite familiar with oppression. This is not a parable about laziness or investment. This is a story about imperialist domination. This is a story about choosing to stand up to systems of oppression and abusers of power, even when it seems impossible, and there seemed to be no immediate return on your efforts. Standing against oppression, standing with the oppressed is always the right choice, and it was the model that Jesus gives throughout the book of Luke. The placement in this book is strategic. It's placed right after the well-known story of the tax collector who was small in stature. He was named Zacchaeus. We love this story. Zacchaeus had chosen to be a part of a system of oppression as a tax collector. It allowed him to become wealthy. It allowed him to be comfortable. And he had spent his life cheating and extorting others until he met Jesus and then made a choice to step away from that life and to repay the harm he had done. Like the third enslaved man, his choice had repercussions. Although we don't necessarily see them in the narrative, Zacchaeus chose to sacrifice his present for his future by refusing to participate anymore in a system of oppression. I don't imagine Zacchaeus could have continued to afford the square footage of a home that required dishonest gain to pay the mortgage. We don't know if Zacchaeus remained at his job, if he lost or gained friendships and connections, what his family thought. But like the third enslaved man, his decision was not a lazy one. It was a decision to stand against oppression, to not be a part of helping the powerful become more powerful at the expense of the less powerful. It was a choice to be a part of a different type of kingdom. The parable of the pounds is followed by Jesus entering Jerusalem on a donkey and being celebrated by the people he has healed, he has taught, he has fed, he has stood with. And then Jesus enters the temple and drives out the extortionists there, people who were selling sacrifices and other things at inflated prices, extorting their fellow Jews. You can see a theme throughout this book. If we were to allegorize this parable, Jesus wouldn't be the nobleman. He would be the third enslaved man. More than just teaching against and standing against oppression. Just a few chapters later, Jesus is killed. He wasn't killed because people were confused or tricked, but because Jesus all along had been calling for an upsetting of the system. He was a disruptor. And that upset a lot of people. The powerful who wanted to rise to more power, and those who had decided that disrupting the system came with too many consequences. In his healing of the sick, the weak, the children, the women, in his teachings, in his storytelling, in his feeding the hungry without asking for their SNAP benefits first, in his praying, Father, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, Jesus was calling subtly and openly for an end to the abuses of power, for an end to oppression and the end to the powerful getting more powerful at the expense of the weak. A call to give agency to those who had no voice. These were not bedtime stories. They were calls to action and to change, and they were invitations to be a part of something with benefits that may only be seen in the future, or not at all in our lifetimes. And the powerful don't want that junk on earth. And this is where the parable knocks me down, because I have to ask myself, who am I in this parable? I've been the nobleman, stepping on whoever I need to get power and position I want or feel I deserved, caring more about my own feelings than the feelings of others, acting before I think and darn the consequences. My comfort and greed at the center of my world. And I've been slave one and slave two. I've willingly participated in the system because it was easier. I've been afraid of rocking the boat. I have been silent when I should have spoken up. I've stayed seated when I should have walked out. I've been guilty of convincing myself that I am already woke enough or that I'm nice enough so that the calls for me to listen and act don't apply to me anymore. I've cared more about my own well-being than the well-being of others. But I want to be enslaved man number 3. I want to be someone who acts as Jesus did, who refuses to accept injustice, who refuses to participate in the oppression of others directly or indirectly. That's who I want to be. And sometimes I am, but not nearly as much as I should be. Acting as enslaved man number 3 is not an easy choice. It's not a lazy choice. Because when we choose to be active citizens in God's kingdom, we are disruptors. Disruptors of the status quo. We stand up against oppression and tyranny and things that are not okay in all of its forms, whether it's in our world, in our neighborhoods, in our families. It could be petitioning, it could be marching, it could be speaking up at our school or work, it could be rethinking our own speech and what we participate in. It could be calling out Uncle Frank his racist comments at dinner this week. It doesn't mean we can't do all of these things with kindness, but it does mean we have to choose. So I want to leave us with a simple, action. Let's find some time this week in all of the things we're doing and planning in this week of gratitude, in this season of giving, for some introspection, to ask ourselves, where do we find ourselves now, today, in this parable? Who are we? Where are we? And who do we want to be? Happy Thanksgiving, Crosspoint. I am really grateful for all of you.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.